What is up, everybody on Facebook Live, Code Noobs live stream? It is Saturday, March 16th at 9 o'clock a.m. We're here today talking about a very important topic, something that actually you have control over that can drastically influence how successful you are as a developer, both in your learning process and also getting a job, making lots of money, living the dream life, traveling, maybe going
Yeah.
to some beach place with margaritas in your hand. But before we do get into that, uh, joining me today is Dan, and I am Randall, and we are going to be guiding you today in terms of talking about the developer work ethic. What's up, Danny?
What's up, man? How's it going? Yeah, developer work ethic is an important topic. But before we get into that too, anybody watching, if you have comments, questions, throw them down there and we'll respond, It's always a good time to get engaged and be engaged. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
developer work ethic, though. What do you think about
Mm-hmm.
this?
Well, for most people who are apt and they watch often, they might notice there's only two of us here today.
Yeah.
Oftentimes there's three, and they're like, one of these things does not
Like,
line up. Yeah. So Russell's away on vacation. He will be joining us again next week, but I'm sure he's having a great time. And that's one of the cool things about being
yeah,
a developer is you get to pretty much choose your schedule. Actually, Danny and I were talking about this earlier
yeah,
about how most people end up choosing a career first and then they get stuck with the lifestyle that that career dictates. So like a lot of people are
yeah,
like, I want to make a lot of money. I'm going to be a lawyer or I'm going to work in finance or something like that. And then they find out that they have to work 90-hour weeks for 40 years in order to make a lot of money. And they make a lot of money and they drive around a Porsche and they get really fat and miserable and all this stuff. But they don't realize that it's a terrible life that comes along with it. Whereas
yeah.
when you're a developer, you kind of get to choose and do whatever you want to do.
Well, and there's nothing better too, I think, like, than being able to go on vacation or go elsewhere besides like your home and still be able to work too. So like you have that freedom also that like even if you do need to do some work, you're not stuck in one place. Because that's what always got me too about working is like so many jobs require you to be there, and you have to be there to do it. And it's like, and then like you said, you're also stuck with whatever that lifestyle is too, because like a lot of jobs are going to demand a lot of you if you want to excel, and it might mean putting in a ton of hours or working, even though you put in 8-hour days or 9-hour days, getting home and then having to put in time then because you're getting emails or, you're getting text messages about this or that. And it's like, yeah, I think choosing our lifestyle is important, but it's also, I get why it's hard because, we're told to do this when we're what, like 17, 18 to come up with a career plan for the rest of our lives.
Hmm. Yeah. And oftentimes we don't have very good guidance in terms of choosing careers. I mean, both of us. So like for anybody who's out, a lot, I hear this a lot because when I tell people that I'm a developer, they're like, "Oh, you're lucky you get to do that, work wherever, do whatever." And it's like it wasn't always that way. Like both you and
No.
I used to have careers where we had to show up a certain time every day. We maybe got 2 weeks vacation and it was never when we wanted it and yada yada yada, but it was actually changing careers to development and doing it during the time of one of the biggest tech layoffs ever and still
Yeah.
finding work. And that's the cool thing for anybody who's listening to this is it's totally possible for you as well because anything that one person can do, another
Yeah.
person can do as well.
Yeah, that was funny when we were like when we first started learning this. Those tech layoffs happened like what was it, like I think it was like 2 months after we started, like really
Hmm.
started. And I was like, oh man. And like in my head, back in my mind, I thought, great, I chose something and now this is it's all gonna fall apart. But and
Hmm.
then I really thought about it and stepped back and I was like, yeah, but you know what though? It's like these big companies, they have how many employees, you know? And like realistically, that's not the only option. There's always going to be needs for developers because the internet's not going anywhere. Tech is not going anywhere. And pe most people don't really know how to build things and make things using it. So it's
Hmm.
still a great job to have, I think. It's awesome. And the freedom
So,
is
so
nice.
what was it like for you? Like, what drove you to want to become a developer?
Well, I always like technology. I've always been like tinkering on my computer. I've always been the person to fix things for family members and stuff when they struggle with stuff like the IT support type thing. And I always I always just like learning about like the hardware I find interesting. So I'd always read about like the new DDR coming out or whatever, or the new specs for this. Because I don't know, it interests me. and whatever. And so, I was kind of just in my career and realized, I was kind of felt trapped. I had, there was nowhere for me to go in my career. The industry had totally changed in academia where like there's very little full-time jobs now and opportunities. And you also can't like move easily into something else. Because I mean, think about academia, right? If you teach one subject, that's pretty much all you can do. And like doing anything new is really hard and difficult. So I was just getting really frustrated. And then, I thought, well, why not this? It's something that I actually do love. I mean, and it's something I can do that I could learn because it's something you can learn on your own. That's the other thing. Most other professions, like you have to go again to school, and that was the last thing I wanted to do was go to another university or something because it takes 4 years just to get a PA, and then you usually have to go to another graduate program after that. By the time you're done, that whole industry might change too. It's like you don't know, and you're gonna have another couple hundred grand in debt because they just keep going up in price. So I was like, definitely not doing that. So
Hmm.
this was a good option, and I love it, so it worked out really well in that sense.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that school thing because I recently went back to school because since I was a kid I always want to be a hacker, but I thought it was something that you just needed to have to be this special type of thing, like an incredible computer genius. And I was just like, I don't have that. But then I got to a point where I realized that, my impending mortality and eventually I'm not going to be here. So I might as well just try to do these things I want to do. And so I went and I got a master's in cybersecurity. And it's a great thing to have on a resume, but it was not practical at all. All theory, all just reading about, I mean, the laws and whatever. It's important to know that stuff if you're going to be like a chief information security officer or something like that. But I wanted to do this so that I could do penetration testing. So I could like penetrate
Yeah.
networks and do all types of stuff. And it's crazy because I went through the whole thing just like waiting until I'd get to the point where I was going to learn something. And then it ended, and I was like, okay, what was that? And then on my own, I mean, this is where it comes to the work ethic, which I think we're
Yeah.
finally getting to. It's on my own finding the correct resources, which was helpful because I found the correct people who directed me in the direction of those resources,
Yeah.
and then putting in the time and effort to be one of the top performers on those platforms. That's where I really ended up learning, and that's where the work ethic comes in.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned that because like people forget too that academics spend their lives in academia. They're not in the industry. You get some cases where you might have some overlap, but most of them, they don't do the practical stuff daily usually. So they only really know the theory and they know it well and they kind of have some helpful information, but they're not going to help you get to that point where you're doing the practical stuff. And you're right, like, and everybody knows this too, like even in academia, like it's about your work ethic. The best students, the ones that are doing stuff on their own, that are going out there and learning new things, that are doing things on their own motivation, not just relying on somebody else to kind of feed them, information and to learn that way. So I think like work ethic becomes really all it's about. And it's hard at first. I remember when we started like down this path, like we all had jobs, you know, life was busy. And I remember like I was like, I really, really want to do this. So the only way I can do this is to, for like a year, I don't think I really went out much at all. I didn't do a lot of things because I knew that like with my job and stuff and with my other responsibilities, the only way this was going to happen was if I really just kind of made a box around myself so I could focus and do it. But
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, I'm grateful that I did. But it takes that kind of commitment and work ethic sometimes to do it if you want to do it quickly.
Well, you make a great point, and I think like a lot of the people who are listening to this right now or watching it, they're the people who are actually putting in the work to get the direction that they want. Because we, I mean, we went to a boot camp, and that's how basically we learn the modern technologies. Because we've all been messing around with different coding for however long, but we
Yeah.
figured, hey, we we thought that the boot camp was the answer. We thought that you go to a boot
Yeah.
camp and then you get hired. Well, it turns out that's not true. The only people who
Not even
actually
close.
guarantee that you will get a job as a developer is us. So if you want more, you could check that out at codenews.io/mentoring. But that being said, we went to a boot camp and it was a very interesting experience because it gives you the idea of work ethic. Like we all went
Yeah.
there a little bit later on in our careers. So we've already had jobs. And I mean, we've all been working for a long time since we were teenagers. We've all been working. And so the idea is you do work. Like if you're going to learn
Yeah.
something, You study on your own, you continue working. And so they would give us a certain number of hours of material to learn, and then you would have to do that. And then we would meet up once a week, and during that time, we would go over some exercises based on what we learned. And invariably, every week, we were the only ones who actually completed anything before the weekly workshop. And it was not a small group. It was
No.
15, 30 people in there, something like that.
Yeah. It was like I
And
think it was like that. Yeah.
yeah, and so everybody was just showing up hoping to, by osmosis, to learn programming. And
Well,
it's
dude,
not something you can do with just 1 or 2 hours a week.
I remember talking to people in our group when we were doing, I think it might have been the Python module or whatever. We're like, they hadn't done any of the assignments when we were in the last week. I was like, how do you plan on doing this? Because you know what? Right after that week, another module starts. It's like immediate, you know? Like, when are you going to make this up? And I think this is the hard part too. I think a lot of people like think they see education like that, like boot camp or something. They think, well, they'll give me all the tools and then I just get a job. But they forget that like they're gonna just give you some stuff that you have to then do stuff with. And if you don't do stuff with it, you're not gonna get to that point where you know anything
Mhm.
afterwards. And it's hard,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it's like everybody sees the results, you know, the six-figure salary,
Yeah.
the cush job at some FANG company, whatever it is, living on a beach, whatever it is. Everybody sees the results and they're like, I want the results. And results, they're not up to you. Not at all. Whims of
No.
fate, you know? But the action, the efforts, this is something that is within your control. And so, like, listening to stuff like this, learning from people, making connections, trying, failing, going again. All of these
Mhm.
things are really the difference. Like, your action makes a difference. It doesn't matter so much if you get the result or not, because if you keep acting in the direction that you want to go, eventually you're going to get a result.
Yeah, and you know what helped me a lot too is something you said earlier too about like I think you mentioned you realize like, you're mortal, right? Like you don't have infinite time. And like you really wanted to try something. And that helped me a lot too when we were doing this. I was like, I was really unhappy with what I was doing in my life at the time in my career. And I was like, well, I can be miserable indefinitely, or I could try something different and reminding myself that, look, I don't have forever. Like I have this one life, regardless of what you believe afterwards. I have this one life and I have to make something of it. And it's up to me to do that. Nobody's going to do it for me. Nobody else is going to live my life. Nobody else is going to come over and take over and then let me just get back into the seat or something, you know? And I think that really helped me too, just like say to myself, well, look, if I really want this, I got to make it happen. And that's going to take effort and work and but it's worthwhile because
Mhm.
you do get to a point where all of a sudden, it's hard at first. Things start to change when you put that effort in consistently. And you start to see
Mhm.
that positive changes after a little bit of time. It just gets better and better from there, which is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the helpful drivers for me was always having a pain so big that I would do whatever it takes to get away from that.
That does
You know,
help.
like,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of people probably can relate to this because they may have a job that they can't stand, a boss that they can't stand, just like some life situation they just like they're like enough is enough. And that's basically where I got to a few times in my life when I made big changes. And one of them was with programming because I was like, I was working as a veterinarian, and while this is everyone's dream job, the reality of the job is nothing like you would imagine. And it was also something where even though I was one of the top producing vets in the area, it was still very demanding, both like emotionally, but also just time wise. You were basically never had any free time. You got 2 weeks vacation, but they would never let you take 2 weeks consecutively. So you would get 1 week here and 1 week there, which is just terrible. And then like I found myself sometimes working in environments that were just like toxic. Just everybody else was doing the bare minimum,
Yeah.
and it just ended up putting a lot more work on my shoulders. And I was like, you know what? I'm freaking done working for other people. I'm done working at a place I don't want to work, the time I don't want to work, doing all this stuff. And it was during that while working full-time job, I had to go and put in the extra work in order to do all this stuff.
Yeah. And I think that's it though, reminding yourself that you're doing it for you, right? You're doing it to change a situation you're unhappy with and make it infinitely better. And like, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because it is hard. And like, I do. toxic work environments too, because they end up infecting you. And that's the danger too, where like you see it, you see people that used to be like, you know, very dedicated, very hard workers their work starts to suffer too because everybody around them is doing nothing, you know? And it's like you don't want to, I don't want to turn into that either. So it's like you
Yeah.
have to get yourself out of that as well. And it's also like I got sick and tired too of like having to, like you said, somebody else tell me when I had to be places or what I had to do or what tasks I had to take on rather than having
Mhm.
it up to me. And I think, that was the other thing about tech. It's awesome, but it does take that effort.
Mhm.
Do you have any tips for like work ethic? Like how would you go about like when we first started? I mean, can you remember anything you did that maybe helped like keep on
Mhm.
course?
Yeah. So I've always been one for eliminating distractions because this is the big time killer. Like nowadays, it is so easy to get distracted. Like your attention is the number one most valuable thing for any company about out there because they know if they can hold your attention, they can make money off of you. So
Yeah.
for me, I've always been big for limiting distractions. And what that means to me is pretty much no social media
Yeah.
and definitely no social media apps on my phone. Uh, and then also no news. And, you know, pretty much if I do watch TV or if I do something, it's something that's directed. I'm not just going through the channels. I'm not just doing that because if I do have spare time, there's stuff that I want to learn. There's stuff that I want to get done. Like I'm working on some pretty difficult certifications right now that require a lot of time and effort, like months and months of preparation in order to pass them. And you're not even
Yeah.
guaranteed to like it's oftentimes where you don't pass these on your first try. So it's like this is something where I need to put in a lot of effort. So any time that I can find away from distractions is great because that's time that I can put into getting where I want to do.
I like that you mentioned that too, because I do that too with the direct, like when you are taking a break, having it very directed so that you're like maximizing that time. Like, like if I'm gonna sit down and watch TV, I'll have a show that I have in mind that I'm gonna watch that I know is entertaining because it's my break time, right? It's my time to just relax. Or like, if I'm gonna do like one of my hobbies, like photography or something, I set an amount of time for it and a time in the day to do it because that way, like, it's not interfering with the rest of my stuff, but I'm getting a good break. And I think that's a really helpful one is like just, time management. Looking at your day and asking yourself, like, am I just sitting on my phone scrolling? All of our phones nowadays, you can put it in, the do not disturb mode, whatever they call it on whatever version you have, right? Where you're not going to get bothered by stuff, you're not going to get notifications, turn your notifications off, right? Things like that can really help you stay focused on the task at hand. And I think, for me too, like just like we both like we got into tech obviously because we really liked it. We both had ideas about what we wanted to do. And like, when you first start out, finding something that just also just excites you, with tech. There's so many different areas of technology and so many different things you could do. So finding, kind of what excites you to help you kind of get into it early on, like, what do you like just like reading about? Well, read that stuff then. If you're interested in AI, read AI while you're learning, the basics of like HTML and CSS because that'll like get you thinking about this stuff more and more advanced ways and also just keep you kind of focused on like that area of interest that's going to help you in the future.
Yeah, I like what you said with like reading AI because I think that's something that's drawing a lot of people nowadays. Like I've seen people comment how they're interested in learning AI and different things like that. And I think that's really important to start reading it now, even if you don't understand it. And
Yeah.
this is something that took me the longest time to learn because there would be something that I'd be interested in and I started reading the book and I didn't understand it and I'd give up. I'd put the book down and that would be the end of it. And then one time, probably about like a year or two ago, I just made up my mind because I got to this point where like every book I didn't understand stuff.
Yeah.
You know? I was like, I can't not read every book. So I got to this point where I'm just like, I'm gonna go through it no matter what. And I may not read it cover to cover, but I'm gonna read the parts that are interesting to me. And I just look at it as an iterative process. Like the first time through, probably won't understand much, maybe 20 to 50%. But I guarantee in a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I'm going to understand this a lot better. And then all that time that I put in before is going to help in the future.
Yeah, and it also helps make you aware of stuff that might be valuable later on that you can leverage in what you're doing. Like accessing, say, like, they're building a web app where you need to access APIs for, using some AI. Well, this way now you do understand at least enough about it that you get how it works. You can maximize that usage of it, right? And make it really work for you. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think, yeah, I totally get what you're saying about not understanding all of it. Because there was plenty of stuff I read, especially when we first started out, dude, and like, they were way over my head in many parts, but it's still, it was interesting and it's still worth reading, even if you don't understand it, and not stressing about not understanding it first, because that's the hard part, I think, especially when you transition. At least for me, it was too. Like, you've been in a career for, however long, a decade more. You're skilled in it. You know what you're doing. Things are kind of easy. Transitioning careers feels hard because all of a sudden you feel like instead of being like the expert, the person that walks into work and knows what they're doing, now all of a sudden you're this noob, right, that knows nothing. And it's a difficult place to be in, but you're not really a noob though either. You have all that experience. You've already worked. You have all these skills you built up, and reminding yourself of that, you can learn this. Other people have done
Mhm.
it, and before you know it, you do move. I think it moves a lot faster. I noticed that like my learning is much better now than it ever was when I was younger.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good part that you brought up because I remember that when I was struggling really hard with learning cybersecurity. Because, as a veterinarian, after working in emergency medicine for 10 years, I'd pretty much seen anything. Like
Yeah.
anything that could happen to a pet, I'd seen it happen. And, if the pet was uh survivable, I guess, I could help it survive, you know? And so
Viable.
like, yeah, exactly. And so it got to a point where it was easy, you know?
Yeah.
I had all the medications memorized, the doses, everything, and it was just easy. And then I was trying to do this cybersecurity stuff, and everything, everywhere I looked was a challenge. And I can relate to anybody out there who's listening to this right now who like, because I remember so clearly, like learning one language and getting to that point where, okay, you've learned all the loops and the data structures and all these different things. And then it's like, okay, well, where do I go now? And
Oh God, yeah.
like I did that with probably and you know where I went? I went to another language, which
Yeah.
was like the craziest thing. And I did that over and over again. And it was just like struggling there for so long and hitting my head against the wall. And I think that's something that we can really help people out with our mentoring and web dev incubator. But it's something where it's a struggle and it's really difficult to be in that position. And I think a lot of people get there because it's not clear the path. But oftentimes it takes somebody who's been there before in order to help you discover that path.
Well, I think everybody that tries to learn programming on their own gets in that because I had the same thing happen where like you feel like you're making progress, you feel like you kind of know something, but like in reality, you can't really put together a complicated project. You don't even know how to. You don't even know where to start. So you just keep going to the next new thing to make yourself feel like you're making progress. But in reality, all you're learning is the basic stuff of each language, which effectively is the same as the next language, as the next one. So it's
Mhm.
like you're not really progressing. You don't know how to put together, websites. You know how to do all this. And I think, yeah, there's one thing we can help with is we have a directed plan that really is focused on getting you there, which is hard at first. And that comes from our experience too, directly from our past experience and the struggles we
Mhm.
had in trying to eliminate them, which I think is a
Mhm.
really important thing to do.
Yeah. And I think another important part of work ethic is also recognizing when you need to take a break. So we talked about this a couple weeks ago, how I was like pretty much burnout, and I just it took me a while to realize that I needed a break, but I took a few days off, and I met with people who I consider mentors who are further along in my career where I want to eventually get to. And just taking the time off to just like stop pushing forward and to sit down with people who kind of have like a higher view of, well, they've already been in my shoes, so they can kind of see where I need to get to. And just being like, hey, like I'm spinning my wheels here. Can you help
Yeah.
me? And just having them to be able to go to, that was very, very helpful because it helped clear out all of the extraneous stuff. And so now I'm able to focus my work and my energy on a much better path than what I was doing before, where I was just trying to do 20 different things. Now I'm just saying, okay, one thing, and I do this one thing, and then when this one thing is done, then on to the next one.
Well, think about it. It's like anything that you're learning or any new profession you may get into, right? If I had I was in academia for over 15 years teaching. If I had a new teacher come up to me and they're like, well, I'm struggling to put my course together, I would say, well, forget about this, forget about this, forget about this, just focus on this, right? Like, because when you're new, you don't really know what's the most important, so you treat everything as important, right? And that makes it really problematic because then you're kind of going in 75 different directions. So I think, yeah, having somebody to talk to is really helpful there because they can give you that direction and make it more of a direct path rather than all over the place, which is so helpful, you know?
Hmm.
It's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
I know
oh
you
my goodness.
posted this week about what you do when you take a break. So, I mean, enlighten us. How do you get that clarity? How do you take a break from when you
Oh,
need it?
yeah. So I usually I try to every day, like at least like, especially like, and it's this week particularly, it was really nice out here. So, I was trying to take advantage of that because of the nice weather. So I promised myself early in the week, I was like, well, it's going to be really nice for like these 4 days. So each day I'm going to spend at least an hour doing photography because I love it. And so I would always just, I try to manage because I like birds. So I try to manage it when they're mostly out. So, kind of like early morning and then in the afternoon, give myself a half-hour block. And that was my block where I just turn my computer, close it and just grab my camera and go outside, no cell phone or anything, and just enjoy myself. And it's awesome because it's like you get that chance just to do something that you really love too. And, get that break from everything. Your mind gets clear. And I don't know, it's just really relaxing and it's helpful. And it just makes me more energized when I go back in, get back to work. And it's
Hmm.
like, and I can do that now, which is awesome. Like that's the other thing. It's like recognizing that you are able to. I could never do that before with my other job because
Hmm.
you're stuck somewhere and you're not able to just leave when you want. So yeah,
Hmm.
huge
Yeah, one
help.
of the benefits of being a developer.
Yeah.
So, anything else you want to say about developer work ethic?
I would say I guess I would just add too, like, it's at first, it's like schedule, man. Like look at your schedule and try and get a routine down where you can like be consistent because that is really helpful. Like, if you have time, like say in the morning before you go to work or at night, block that time off, eliminate distractions, and use that to learn. And do
Mm,
that for a while and you'll see progress and that'll keep reinforcing the activity over time.
yeah, that's a great point because a developer is someone who codes every day. So, if you want to be a
Yep.
developer, start coding every day, even if it's just for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So that's it for this episode today. But before you go, for anybody who's looking to level up their coding, particularly for somebody who wants to become a paid developer this year, guaranteed, and here's the guarantee, is that if you work with us in Web Dev Incubator, you will become a paid developer within 1 year, or you can keep working with us for free until you do. And if you're not happy with Web Dev Incubator, just let us know in the first month. We'll give you all your money back. And this is one of the least expensive coding programs I
Yes.
have seen online, and it's not going to stay that way forever because as
No.
of right now, uh, most of our students are finding their first work within a couple months. So
Yeah.
that being said, if you're interested in it, you could check it out, codenoobs.io/mentoring. And other than that, for people who are in the Web Dev Incubator, we'll be seeing you at the top of the next hour. So,
Nice.
Danny, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure. And we'll see you next week. And Russ should be back for that as well.
Awesome. See you later, buddy.
Later.